That's right. You're listening to another episode of the Co-Main Event Mixed Martial Arts Podcast. I'm Chad Dundas. That's Ben Folks. We're both longtime MMA journalists, and for the last 12 years, we've been meeting here every week to break down all the action in the wild, weird, and occasionally wonderful world of mixed martial arts. Ben, we got UFC 310 this weekend coming to us from the T-Mobile Arena down there in Las Vegas. Of course, you got your men's flyweight main event of the champion Alexander Pantoja going to square off with UFC newcomer Kai Asakura in from Ryzen. And then your co-main event, Shavkat Rachmanov and Ian Machado. Gary in a welterweight contender fight. We had to shuffle the lineup for this one not too long ago. And so maybe we come in with a little bit of an under the radar pay-per-view. I wanted to start us off this week with this question from our guy Shoulders, Chest, Pants, Shoes, because I feel like it gets to the root of the matter. He says, if a flyweight headlines the last UFC pay-per-view of the year, does anyone notice? Despite all the intriguing storylines, such as the fact that Alexander Pantoja is 9-0 against the top 10 in the UFC flyweight division and now is welcoming an unknown challenger, we also have the undefeated Prospect Bowl in the co-main, in addition to a semi-number one contender fight at 145 with Sterling versus Evelev. But yet this weekend seems to be quiet as kept regarding media fan noise. Do you feel the same? I guess for starters, Ben, I feel like it's natural for this pay-per-view to fly under the radar a little bit. First, because as I said, you had to scramble the main event several weeks ago. It was supposed to be Shavkat Rachmanov and Bilal Muhammad. Bilal Muhammad had to back out, so now you have a bit of a redo here. Second, the UFC's put on a ton of great events this year, and not all of them can be bangers, I suppose. They just gave us John Jones versus Stipe Miocic last month, so now you roll into a UFC 310 where maybe a lot of the bullets that you had in the gun have recently been fired. And third, I guess, you've got a situation where you're promoting an event with arguably your least marketable men's division, and on top of that, at least one of the guys in the fight is almost certainly totally unknown to the majority of your fan base. So yeah, I could see how if you were a casual fan, you might not be totally jacked for UFC 310.
Yeah, but if you start looking at it, you start looking at this one on paper, this is kind of a sneaky good card.
Yeah,
There's
it's
a lot
deep,
of
right?
people that you have heard of. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's a fairly deep card, right? Because you got Cyril Gahn and Alexander Volkov, Bryce Mitchell and Kron Gracie, The Train, Nate Landwehr and Duho Choi, Dominic Reyes, Anthony Smith, Vicente Luque in a little bit of a makeup fight here against Themba Gorimbo. And then, on through the list, you do basically have a lot of known guys from top to bottom. So maybe while it doesn't deliver the star power up top, maybe you arguably have a deeper, more solid card than some of the recent UFC pay-per-views.
Yeah, how many times have we talked about looking through one of these cards and seeing how many people have Wikipedia pages? How many people we've heard of that are not just like they came off the contender series, 6 months ago. This one, you look at the fight card, and pretty much everybody is a somebody. You look at the fight card one way. I think you can judge some of these. Look at the fight card and see how many people have either held or fought for a UFC title who are on this fight card. And it's kind of a lot,
Yeah.
especially by recent standards. And yeah, like to me, one of the things that helps make a fight card, like a pay per view fight card, worth the value in the aggregate is there's a lot of different stuff going on. Not just that, oh, we got a title fight at the top and maybe a contender fight underneath that. That's kind of been the standard, right? Like, especially in recent years, where if we got those two things, we don't worry about the rest. It's kind of filler the way the UFC sees it. But this one, you got a bunch of different, you got some of these fights where it's, fights like Dominic Reyes and Anthony Smith, where you're kind of just seeing who has something left in the tank. That Nate the Train versus Ho Choi, the Korean Superboy, that's one where somebody was just looking at the roster and being like, what would be insane and fun? Oh, I know. Nate the Train and the
Yeah.
Korean Superboy. Nate the Train, Jad, if he doesn't lose, You know what happens?
Sometimes he wins.
Probably he'll win.
Yeah.
Whip
I'm
his
on
ass and
board.
see what happens, Chad.
You know I'm going to be there, but in seat for a Nate Landwehr fight. I don't miss one. That's appointment viewing for this guy.
Yeah, you got kind of those sort of fights where there's some part of it that has an appeal all up and down the fight card.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty good, especially if you don't have a main event that is so compelling that we're sitting there going, well, I got to see this. I
Yeah.
could not live with myself if I missed this. And so you're selling us the full product. And this one, honestly, is one of the fuller products that the UFC has had to sell when it doesn't have that star quality in the main event.
Yeah, it's an unusual scenario here in the main event where you have a UFC newcomer coming in and getting a title shot in his first appearance inside the octagon. Of course, that's Kai Asakura coming in as the former Ryzen bantamweight champion. You know what I saw the other day? I
What'd you
saw
see?
somebody say risen,
Yeah,
and
I
I was like,
I saw Chael Sonnen say it. Is that who you saw say it?
it might have been, yeah. And obviously I've heard a ton of people say Ryzen over the years, but then
Risen
I
kind of
heard,
makes more sense when you say it.
yeah,
My
that's what I
God.
was started thinking about it. I was like, is it risen? Because risen is
But how
sort of
did
an
you?
actual word, and in some ways it would make sense
Yes.
as the name of a fight promotion, whereas Ryzen is like made up unless you're like, rise and shine, right? Or you're out here rising
Yeah.
dirty, right?
Or
Like
it's, I thought we saw it as a promotion kind of saying, we are rising
yeah,
in the
exactly.
MMA
That's what I
world.
thought too. But then risen, shit, man, you already done rised.
Yes. And it does make sense if you think of it as them trying to be sort of the next generation of an Japanese MMA product, right? Like Pride died, we are risen.
Yeah.
And it would even play on the Pride Never Die thing because Risen has that sort of like religious uh, resurrection connotation. So it would work so much better to the point that when I finally heard it, I was just like, how did they let us go this long?
Yeah.
Because I don't feel like we were the only ones. We were kind of famous for mispronouncing shit
I was
on this
watching a
show.
YouTube video earlier today where they're calling it rising over and over again. I'd never heard anybody say risen before this week.
They should have corrected us. Somebody should have corrected us very early on about that because it does. Once you start to think about it, right, this is actually way better. But then that's where you get into a spelling question because it's that second I that's fucking you up.
Yeah, it
You throw
really
that
is.
second I in there. If you had spelled it Rizen, there's only one way to say that. So that that's not all on us if that's the misunderstanding that's happened here. You know what I gotta say? I think credit where it's due. The UFC often does not do a great job of promoting individual fighters because at times it seems like they don't care that much. They've done a pretty good job with Kai Asakura, educating the fan base on who he is and the elements of his story that will be of most interest to them. I was on Ariel Helwani's show earlier today. He brought this up and made me think that some of this maybe is done out of necessity. But the UFC has really highlighted, hey, here's a guy who his brother was in kind of an underground fight scene. His brother hauled him out of bed in the middle of the night one night to be like, we're fighting out here in the street. And there's that home video. Have you seen this? Of his
Yeah.
brother trying to take his damn head off with a high kick at one point. They're on the pavement. They're out there. This is his brother being like, get up, get out of bed. We're going to go out here. I'm going to try to kick you in the damn head on the pavement. And then him being good at least avoiding all the shots and being like, hey, you should give MMA a serious try. When you've got that kind of a story and you don't have a whole lot of other fight footage maybe that you have permission and rights to use, then you lean into that story really hard. But that's a good story. Honestly, that'll work on the MMA fan base. You tell
Yeah.
them this guy came from a street fighting background. His brother tried to beat the shit out of him. It didn't work. And so he became a professional.
Oh yeah, that's not all he's done. It's not like we're vaulting him right into Alexander
Right.
Pantoja from the street fight against the brother. And these guys
But that's
goes
a
out
that's a
there.
hell of an origin story for your
Yeah,
MMA
no.
career. Most other people, their origin story is I got kicked off the football team,
Yeah.
or something else.
Was a pretty good wrestler.
Yeah, was a pretty good wrestler, and that you reached the point where there's nowhere else to go with it. Or in some cases, I kept getting arrested, and then somebody finally told me, hey, here's how you could do this same thing but not get arrested. And so I went, okay, I'll try that. So this is a pretty good origin story. And you pair that with, here's a guy who's come out of the Japanese scene and is so established and respected there that when we announced, hey, in his first UFC fight, he's getting a title shot, even the other guys in the division didn't really have a problem with it.
Yeah.
When is that the case?
Almost never, but as the listener mail already pointed out, Pantoja's already beat a lot of those guys. So,
It's true.
In some ways it's unorthodox to bring a guy in and give him a title shot right away. But in this case, you got the former bantamweight champ we can't start saying risen now,
You think
right?
it's too late in the game?
We're too far down the road.
I don't
Unless
know.
everybody else starts. Chael is the kind of guy, he can say risen.
See, he did, and see, I messaged Chael earlier this week to ask him a question where I was working on a story for Uncrowned about how we've somehow still never had a Japanese UFC champion, which still kind of blows my mind, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
you got a couple of people who came close, a couple of people had title shots. I was thinking particularly about the story of Shinya Aoki's move over. I mean, he went to Strikeforce, but it was sort of a moment where I found this old quote from him that I remember once I found it, where when he went to fight Gilbert Melendez in Strikeforce for the Strikeforce lightweight title. And remember, he was the dream lightweight champion. He was the WAMA champion, I believe, at the time. It was him and Fedor were the two guys where it was just like they're outside the UFC, but maybe the best in the world in their divisions. And before he went over there to fight Gilbert Melendez, he was like, this is where it'll, like, Japanese MMA is all on me now. If I lose, Japanese MMA will become a colony of American MMA. And then he lost. And that was kind of a moment where people went, okay, maybe it's not so great over there anyway. Then you had a couple other guys, had Horiguchi, had Yushin Okami, had some of those guys come over. And it's crazy that there's never been a Japanese UFC champion. So I was asking Chael Sonnen, because I remember people saying at the time, hey, the adjustment to fighting in the cage, when so many of those guys are used to fighting in a ring, that's the difference. And of course, Chael Sonnen, you send him a text to be like, hey, what do you think about this? Your guy pays attention to the game. He's going to send you back 2 videos of him answering your question that are going to total around 6 to 7 minutes long.
Wait a second. Hold on. Did he sit down and make the videos?
No.
Oh, he already had the videos.
No. He's just walking around his house.
So he did make the videos
but
specifically to answer your question.
He wasn't in the studio, so to speak. But yeah, he made the videos to answer my question. Same way, he'll sometimes send me like audio messages or something because he just doesn't want to type it all out. He's a verbose guy,
Yeah.
He's a lot to say. He doesn't want to type it all out. I get it. And this time he's sending me videos as he's walking around his house. You can hear his kids in the background and stuff. And the first video is like 3 minutes long, and I'm like, that's a pretty thorough explanation. Then another one comes through. I click it to hit play, and it begins with him saying, moreover, and I went, this mother. What a beauty. What a beauty. This guy, he's going to start the second video with moreover. But his point was like, no, I don't think the cage makes that big a difference. People don't really train in cages anyway. It's just mostly true of MMA gyms when you go there. They have a cage, but for the most part, the training takes place on wrestling mats up against padded walls to serve as the cages, that kind of stuff. And he was just saying, like, trying to offer alternative theories as to why the Japanese have never had one. And you got somebody who coming on now, and it's like, for the UFC, if they could sell that history, if he were to come in and win, and they could say first Japanese UFC champ, and also maybe help us gain a little bit of a foothold into a market that we know has a thirst for combat sports, but also has been really tough to seriously crack for the UFC. I'm sure they would like that.
Man, that's like you paid Chael for a cameo.
Yeah.
When it was cameo, it's like you got a free Chael Sonnen cameo video out of that.
Yeah. It's amazing.
It's amazing. Kai Asakura, as we said, 2-time Rizin bantamweight champion, has spent like the entirety of his recent career at bantamweight, and of course is dropping to flyweight to fight Pantoja. So that is going to be an interesting factor here. He's going to make flyweight for the first time, I think, in a long, long time. I've been watching some Kai Asakura fights to get ready for this. I got to say, this is a fun guy.
He is.
This is a fun guy to watch. He's an aggressive, dynamic guy. He's got knockout power in his punches. He's durable. He's a free swinger. I'll say that. He's going to go out there and throw them things with whoever happens to be in front of him. And frankly, he's the kind of guy, it seems to me, like that the UFC likes, right? He's going to go out there, put his heart on his sleeve, and kind of slug it out to until one guy falls down, essentially. Now, that's not to say that he doesn't seem like he's a well-rounded guy, because he does. He's got good takedown defense. He's got submissions when he wants to use them. But this is let's be honest, this is a stand and bang guy, and that is probably somewhat of a factor, I would think, also in waltzing in and getting a title shot in your first fight in the UFC, is that they look at you and they think, well, win, lose, or draw, this is going to be a fun one.
Yeah, but we've also seen the UFC go the other way with that sometimes, where when they get somebody like that, they go, well, first, let us put him into a fight against somebody he can stand and bang with and probably knock out, so that we can generate some more excitement, introduce him to our fan base, and then put him on pay-per-view. I got to think at least part of the reason we're not doing that here is maybe you're not terribly confident that you can put him in there against a top 10 flyweight and have him come out on top. Maybe you think that there's at least a chance somebody goes out there and beats him and then ruins your whole plan. And maybe you also think, well, hey, this is the flyweight division we're talking about. Even if we were to generate some excitement about a new contender in the flyweight division, maybe they kind of think there's a ceiling on how much interest you can generate for a flyweight title fight at this point.
Yeah.
So if you got a fresh guy, you just signed him, might as well throw him in there, see what comes of it. You need fresh challengers for this champion anyway, so let's go ahead and let's do it. The thing that, because I also, when watching videos, I was like, here's a guy who will let it all hang out.
Yeah, for sure.
And that is fun to have. Pantoja seems like the kind of guy, though, that we've seen him in some of these fights before, where he is good at, even if you get a little momentum, shutting it down. Like, he gets the takedown when he needs to. He manages to stifle your offense once you start getting it going. He just seems to have a talent for that. What kind of chance are you giving Kai Asakura to come in here and win the title in his first UFC fight?
I mean, it's a big ask, right?
Yeah.
It's a big ask for almost anybody to come in and win the UFC title in their first fight inside the octagon. I see Pantoja's going off at minus 265, so not quite a 3-1 favorite. You know, Asakura has been a little bit back and forth. He hasn't been dominant against the best guys that he's fought, and he split fights with Manel Cape. He had fights with Kyoji Horiguchi. Did he split those also? Yeah,
so.
He beat Horiguchi back in 2019 in 1 minute and 8 seconds at Rizin 18, and then circled back at Rizin 26 and lost to him in a title fight. So, you know, he's been a little inconsistent, I guess, against the top guys that he's fought. Manel Cape already on the Pantoja hit list. So if we're going to do MMA math, if we're going to do strength of schedule, that doesn't go in the direction of Kai Asakura. So I think it's going to be a tough ask. You put on top of that, the guy hasn't fought since New Year's Eve, 2023. So he's coming in almost a year off. And so, yeah, I think it's a tough ask.
Yeah, maybe though. And $20 we never want to see again later this week. Some people will take a flyer on those odds. We'll wait and see.
I mean, this is a guy who seems like he can turn it into a toss-up just with the way he fights. So remains to be seen. All right. That's what we're going to do this week on the main event of UFC 310. We're going to get into some discussion about the co-main event, in which I ask the question, is the co-main actually the main? But that's going to come up here after we do some listener mail, which is right after the break. All right. All right, Ben. Like we always do about this time, let's do a little bit of listener mail.
Listener mail.
First piece of listener mail this week comes to us from the Balenciaga Bandit.
Okay.
No idea what that means.
Clothing brand.
Okay. All right. Says, is
But wait,
Gone
does he
versus...
steal the clothing or does he wear the clothing while he steals?
Maybe we'll get a follow-up. Don't
right.
know. Is Gone versus Volkov going under the radar as one of the most important fights of UFC 310, considering this is essentially a number one contender fight for Aspinall, provided the Jones fight does not materialize? No one is talking about this. I, for one, have Gone versus Aspinall as one of the more compelling fights, particularly if Gone can keep the fight standing, and same for Volkov, who's improved tremendously since his loss. Do you share the same ideas? You know what, Ben, we've been spending so much time talking about whether or not John Jones is going to end up fighting Tom Aspinall, whether or not we were going to get the opportunity to unify the UFC heavyweight title. It's kind of like we forgot about the rest of the division.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, these other guys are still fighting. And if John Jones either doesn't fight Tom Aspinall, retires, or decides to go fight Alex Pereira first and the UFC lets him get away with it, we are going to have to find a different opponent for Tom Aspinall. Maybe it's one of these two dudes.
Yeah, it is such a weird situation because it has seemed like who could possibly insert themselves into that conversation with John Jones and Tom Aspinall when we still don't know whether those guys are even going to fight. And if you're Tom Aspinall, aren't you sitting around being like, listen, before you can get me to consider fighting somebody else, you're going to have to tell me that John Jones is either retired, dead, or somehow has disqualified himself from competition, as Daniel Cormier would say. You're going to have to tell me that that fight is entirely off the table. Because if there's even a chance, if there's any chance at all that I just wait around for the UFC and John Jones to negotiate, or I wait around for John Jones to get bored enough to just take whatever the UFC is offering, I'm waiting.
Yeah.
I'm waiting at least 6 months before I even consider somebody else. And then you'll have to tell me, hey, this interim belt is now the belt, and we want you to turn around and defend it. Now, if that situation does come to pass, and it is depressingly possible that the UFC doesn't offer John Jones what he wants, he tells himself at least he's done, and we have to say, Tom Aspinall, you're the champ now, fight somebody, then this does seem like one of those fights that's likely to produce the somebody, especially if it's Cyril Gane. If he comes out of this, especially if he looks good, again, comes out of this as the winner, then I would think the UFC would go, hey, Tom Aspinall and John Jones would have been a blockbuster pay-per-view, but not necessarily one that we wanted to pay more for. But we'll take Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane if John Jones is going to act like he's retired. Like, that's a fight we could do some business with, and it kind of is.
If they made Tom Aspinall defend the interim title again,
No, come on, no.
man, fuck you. It's not the interim title if you defend it even once, let alone twice. This is, if you look at it, according to the UFC official rankings, number 2 versus number 3 in Cyril Gane versus Alexander Volkov. Of course, the UFC rankings do that weird thing where the champion is not actually part of the ranking. And the interim champ in Tom Aspinall is number 1. So go figure how that works. But you'd assume that the winner of this fight would be a number 1 contender. Kind of funny, you realize you're talking about the heavyweight division when you consider that the number 2 ranked guy in the division in Cyril Gane is actually just 2-2 in his last 4. However, his losses are Francis Ngannou and John Jones. He's going off.
You can say that file that one, Chad, under that's so heavyweight, baby.
Yeah, he's minus 375 here, so almost a 4-1 favorite over Alexander Volkov. But Ben, if what you end up doing for your UFC heavyweight title is Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane, on the offhand chance that Cyril Gane wins, does that make your UFC heavyweight title look even shittier than the UFC heavyweight title normally looks, just owing to this division's absolute insanity and instability. But then you'd have a champ that's already lost to the last two champs that you just had.
Yeah, but he's also an exciting champ to watch when he gets to do his stuff. You know,
Is he
he
though?
is he is he though?
You know my feelings about Cyril Gahn.
Refresh my memory. You're anti Cyril Gahn?
Is dinking and dunking out there. Just
This is
you know.
about Tai Tuivasa, isn't it? That's what this is about. He went out there and beat the brakes off Tai Tuivasa, and you'll never forgive him for it. He ruined the prophecy. The prophecy was on track, and then Cyril Gahn ruined it, and you're holding a grudge.
Look, I have no more comments about Cyril Gahn at this time.
He put Tai Tuivasa away with strikes on the feet in a way that did not seem possible based on what we had seen previously. He looked great. I mean, when he gets to do his stuff, he's a really fun guy to watch. He will also, though, he's not dumb. Cyril Gahn knows he's fighting at heavyweight. He knows these big guys can land one punch and put your lights out. And so when he has gotten in these kind of fights where he can hang back from a distance and outpoint people, he doesn't feel the need to wade in there and risk anything, which I don't necessarily blame him for that. But Cyril Gahn just seems like a likable dude. I don't see
He
how
does.
you hate on Cyril Gahn.
He does seem like a nice guy. Of course.
Remember when they went to the mall and he found the Martin leather jacket, and his coach, who was also French, I believe, had never seen Martin, the old TV show, and Cyril Gahn in French explains to him the concept of Martin Lawrence's whole thing, his whole comedic, and it's just like, yeah. See, I would watch a YouTube show that's just Cyril Gahn explaining the premise of 90s and early 2000s TV shows to people who have not seen them.
Well, they don't call him the Bon Gami for nothing.
Yeah.
Right? He is a tough guy to dislike, even if he did go out there and ruin the prophecy and just beating the shit out of Tai Tuivasa. But, you lose to a version of Francis Ngannou that only has one leg. They got to do something to rehabilitate you. So
here we go.
Yeah.
After he said he was done talking about Cyril Gahn.
Next question this week comes to us from Charles Schwab.
Okay.
Legendary investment banker.
Maybe it's a different guy.
I don't know. Please tell me you guys saw the new trailer for the upcoming Fury versus Usyk rematch, and please tell me it was the greatest thing you ever saw.
Oh my God.
Yes and yes.
See, this ought to make other, especially MMA promoters, ashamed of themselves, Chad, because you know how we do. We put together a trailer for the next UFC pay-per-view, and sometimes it's like, these guys kind of vaguely don't like each other, or this guy thinks he's the best, but the other guy says, nuh-uh, I am. That's what we do kind of every time, just rinse and repeat. It's the same shit over and over again. And these beautiful madmen over there promoting this fight are like, okay, what if it's a sort of Being John Malkovich-esque world where Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk are so driven by this rivalry with one another that they lose their damn minds. They lose their already tenuous grasp on reality itself, Chad, and begin seeing each other's faces everywhere until they find themselves on the ragged edge of madness and can only claw their way back to sanity by fighting each other again. And it's amazing.
Yeah,
the entire
it really
thing.
Is. Yeah. Yeah, it's done in the style of one of these new horror movies that they're churning out like crazy. The Smile, stuff like
that. You won't ever see a horror movie.
As close as I'm getting to watching a horror movie is watching a 2-minute trailer for an upcoming boxing match. But it really is amazing. And it's I wish that it wasn't financed with the Saudi money, but you got to say that the last several of these big attractions that they've had over in Saudi Arabia, they've really done a great job promoting them, just like running circles around anything we see in MMA, both in terms of production value, which is maybe to be expected when you got an unlimited swimming pool full of money to utilize in terms of paying for this stuff, but also just creatively. Like, when was the last time you saw anything like this in the world of MMA even just in terms of like making even a half-assed attempt at being creative, right?
Yeah. This the one, both concept and execution seemed like some people were daring to dream big and willing to try something. And that is the thing, right? When we talk about the UFC, for better and worse, the UFC is such a well-oiled machine at this point that when they put on a pay-per-view, unlike some of the Saudi boxing events that we've seen, things click right along. There's no part in the evening where somebody has to get on the mic and ask people to take their seats.
Right.
There's no part in the evening where there's like a long song and dance number that nobody asked for. Like that kind of shit where it just seems like every time they do it is the first time they've ever done it. That doesn't happen at a UFC event. They have it sort of like a prepackaged thing where they just plug in different fighters, different city, and they go. The downside to that is that they also take that approach to fight promotion sometimes,
Right.
where even like putting together the posters or anything, like it just kind of seems like they've decided everything there is to know about fight promotion we already know. We already have the formula. Let's just do that again. And there are some aspects of that that work from as a viewing experience, and then there are some aspects of that where you lack the creativity because you're not willing to try too much new stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're the UFC, you don't have to promote, right? Because you
Right.
already got the audience showing up week in and week out to watch it. They got their set it and forget it ESPN Plus subscriptions already paid for, and so you're already doing the business that you're supposed to do. Shout out, by the way, to Fury and Usyk for doing this.
Yeah.
Because you got to think like some fighters, if you tried to explain this, you and I have tried to explain concepts to fighters before,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't always go great. So you can imagine like trying to explain what this is going to be to these guys and having one or both of them be like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, yeah. Imagine you go to Usyk and you're like, okay, so here's the thing, right? Like you're walking down the street and like a guy claps you on the shoulder. You think he's attacking you. You turn around, push him up against the wall. He's like, hey, you dropped your wallet, and you're like, oh, okay, thanks. And then you see his face turn into Tyson Fury's face, and you're horrified. And then as he walks away, you see Tyson Fury's face on the back of his head, and then you're even more scared. And explaining that concept to him and then having him not just like give you a very confused face and then go, I am scared? No. Like
You got to
just
talk
turn it
Tyson
down flat.
Fury. You got to talk Tyson Fury into the first scene of this thing is him in therapy, talking about how worried he is that he sees Alexander Usyk everywhere he goes, right? You could see
Yeah.
either of these guys saying no to that shit, but no, they both said they both had yes mentality.
Yes, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's what you can hope for. And the product is incredibly memorable. I watched it several times because I was just like, no, they did not. No, they did not do this shit.
And you know what? Once they're on board, not bad acting performances
No,
from
none at
either of the
all.
big fellas, which need I remind you, Alexander Usyk is going to play Igor Vovchanchin in the Smashing Machine,
Oh
the
shit, I completely forgot about that.
the movie starring The Rock as Mark Kerr. And so I don't know, maybe this raises the bar a little bit. We get to see Vovchanchin, and as portrayed by Usyk, maybe Usyk stretches his acting legs a little bit. Although they didn't call
Vovchanchin,
Vovchanchin ice cold for nothing, right?
yeah, I was just gonna say he doesn't give you a whole lot. It's not like you're sitting out here being like, oh man, I gotta portray David Bowie in this upcoming film. How am I gonna channel the energy? It's just like flat. If you can just do completely flat as Igor Vovchanchin, you've nailed it.
Yeah, I guess that's right. Next
And looking
question.
like a 30-year-old baby somehow.
Next question this week comes to us from Chuckles McSweeney, who says, I'm worried for Nick Diaz. How worried should we be for Nick Diaz? Nick
I was,
Diaz was supposed to be on this card, right? Vicente
yeah.
Luque against, they had to call in Themba Garimbo. Still don't know if that's a real guy. To take Nick Diaz's spot. There's a video of a shirtless Nick Diaz on the side of the road trying to set grass on fire, is what it appeared like he was doing. And since then, I believe either a girlfriend or an ex-girlfriend of Nick Diaz has come out and said something to the effect of he's taking this fight because he needs to support his addiction. And so some rumor and evidence to suggest that maybe Nick Diaz is not doing great right now.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, in answer to the question, um how worried should I be about Nick Diaz? I'd say probably pretty worried. Like, you should be worried about Nick Diaz the same way you're worried about like climate change, and that yeah, it doesn't seem like it's going in a great direction. However, any one of us, our ability to step in and do something about it seems pretty limited.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That's it always seemed like right. Like, even when everything in Nick Diaz's life and career was going great, you probably should have still been worried about him. Just because of the kind of guy he was. And when you see this and you're just sort of like when Robbie Lawler beat him and the first thing he said to him in the cage afterwards was, "Are you okay like in life?" Like, Robbie Lawler was worried about him.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like things have gotten more cheerful in Nick Diaz's world since then. It it honestly, having this fight get called off and a replacement opponent come in to face Vicente Luque feels like good news, kind of, for the MMA world, just because that fight was never going to be anything athletically meaningful or good to watch, or that would make us feel good after we'd watched it. Remember when you were telling people who said they felt dirty after watching Mike Tyson and Jake Paul, and you were like, "Welcome to the fight game." Like, this was going to be one of those for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And so, not doing that, I think is probably better. Did you see Vicente Luque's quote about that?
I did not see that. I just saw that Themba Gorimbo is at least the former EFC welterweight champion and is riding a 4-fight win streak in the UFC, which definitely makes this seem like a little bit more of a legitimate fight, and actually pretty close odds wise. In fact, Themba Gorimbo is a slight favorite over Vicente Luque.
He says, I don't know why exactly the fight was canceled. I saw that video of him in the streets, and he didn't look okay. And more than anything, I hope his family and hope he's taking care of himself. Hope he recovers and goes back to his best state possible. It's very sad to see him at that stage because I don't want that for anyone, much less a man that has inspired so many. That's Vicente Luque for you, Chad.
All class is what that is. I saw that they asked Jason Mayhem Miller to comment on the situation, and
Who's they?
he was in some interview. I can find it for you here. But that's, you know what? That's as big of a red flag as you're going to get if a recently sober and cleaned up Jason Mayhem Miller is handing out life advice.
But honestly, doesn't Mayhem Miller seem like maybe somebody that you could get Nick Diaz potentially to listen to? Like, they're not completely dissimilar. And Mayhem Miller is somebody who seemed like he was in a Nick Diaz type situation and is maybe now doing better. Maybe
Yeah.
now on a better side of it.
Yeah. It was Helen Yee,
Okay.
in case you're wondering. But yeah,
Now I want to see what was Mayhem Miller's advice.
Let's see here.
They should do a reality show where Mayhem Miller goes to Stockton to help Nick Diaz get his shit together.
Well,
And
his
Mayhem Miller
advice
gets jumped at least 5 times by the whole crew during the filming.
He says, we had our beef, whatever, since we were kids, but that doesn't stop me from extending a helping hand to this guy if he needs it. And if he's not ready to take a helping hand, you all need to keep on him. The people who are close to him, his brother, his family, his friends, all you guys that made money off him, he needs you now. He needs a circle back. That's not talking bad on him. It's a tough sport we're in, and it's easy to get tripped up in the wrong things. It's super easy. And it's even harder to come up out of that. So my advice is not for him. It's for the people around him to help him get to a better place in his life.
But that's honestly tremendous advice. And that especially you'd hope the people around him who need to hear it. Because, yeah, I could see Mayhem Miller probably felt that way, where it was just like a whole lot of people around when things are going well, and then when they're not, all those people kind of disappear because you can't do anything for them anymore, and that's when you actually need some friends. It wasn't when we were lifting weights in the living room doing nunchucks and smoking bong resin, you know?
Last question this week comes to us from our guy Nobby Buckles over on Patreon. He says, listener mail question, or not really a question, but more of a reminder. It's December, which means it's almost time for the most prestigious award season of them all, the co-main event mixed martial arts podcast, Seamies.
The Seamies!
The sheer anticipation of the pageantry is palpable amongst the people, so prepare your proposals or nominations as we enter into the most specialist time of year. As always, there's no need for mourning, which he capitalizes. You can combat, which he spells with a K, the corporate fat cats trying to fetter the discourse by participating yourself in the official co-main event podcast Discord. You can submit nominations for existing categories, such as the exalted most artful application of Dundasso, aka the You Mad Bro Award, the Joe Son Don't Google the Fighters Award, aka the Gina Carano Lifetime Achievement Award, or the Unfettered Discourse Award. I hope you'll join us in helping the guys make this the most successful and most pageantry-rich award show in all of MMA podcasting, and let us celebrate the podcast which brought us all together to hear us have Chad say fart that one time on the podcast. The CMEs are coming up. It's that time of the year. It's the end of the year co-main event podcast award show. It'll be over on the Patreon page. Here's the thing about the CMEs, Ben. Every year, the last several years we've been doing it, it's the most listened to show that we do on the Patreon, and it's just a lot of fun.
It's also, to my knowledge, the only award show where you as an individual could potentially start a grassroots effort to create a new award. 2 weeks, 1 week, 3 days out, and it could happen.
Yeah, still plenty of time.
You could just come to us and say, I have a new award category. Here it is. Here's what it should be called. And if we like it, that award category could very well show up on the CMEs. Very exciting time of the year.
Looking forward to it. This is as good a time as any to mention. We still got the 50% off holiday sale going on over at the Patreon page. Right now, if you are not currently a paying member or subscriber to the CME Patreon, you can get 50% off either on a monthly membership or an annual membership if you go to the site and use the code 20E as in Echo 37. It's only for a couple more weeks. You got to get in on this thing before December 15th. Maybe you've thought about joining the Patreon. Maybe you used to be a member and you wandered away. This is a great time to either check it out or come on back into the fold, but you got to do it in the next 2 weeks. We've had a bunch of subscribers pick up this deal and sign on. And you know who's getting the best deal of all? Honestly, it's the annual people. They're saving a boatload of money getting involved, paying for a year of the finest MMA content money can buy.
And you know what? I mean, one thing I think that we have established being the longest continually running MMA podcast in existence is we prove we'll still be around this time.
That's right. We're not going anywhere. We couldn't if we wanted to. Yeah. We're chained to these desks practically.
If we were going to give up on this thing, it would have happened by now. Trust me. So we're not like, this is like that time where they tried to sell me on paying for a year membership at some boxing gym. And I was like, but what happens if you guys fold? They didn't have an answer. And then like 2 months later, they did fold. And I was glad I hadn't done it. We're basically the opposite of that because shit, if we're still here after all this time, we've seen entire careers in this sport come and go. The CME remains.
Head on over to patreon.com/co-main event to sign up. Again, you can use that code 20E as in Echo 37 to get 50% off. If you have a question, comment, or concern that you want to air to the podcast in future weeks during listener mail, you know how to do it. You go to the website co-mainevent.com and click the link in the top right-hand corner of the screen that says email the podcast. That'll get you in touch with us. And Ben Folks, somebody's O has got to go in the co-main event featuring Shavkat, That Boy Good Rachmanov versus Ian Machado. Gary, and we will talk about that right after this. All right, Ben. This may sound insane, but are you more or less excited to see Shavkat, That Boy Good Rachmanov fight Ian Machado, Gary, than you would have been to see Shavkat, That Boy Good fight Bilal, remember the name, Muhammad?
You know, not really, just because I feel like Shavkat had earned a title shot, right? So I was excited to see him finally get that opportunity. I was also excited to see him in something that I expected to be more of a competitive fight which is one thing that we have not seen him in yet. He hasn't gone to the scorecards. He every single fight that he's in, he seems to just easily exert his will, and from the get go, everybody is dancing to his tune and trying and unsuccessfully trying to fail to fend him off. So I was excited to see him fight Bilal because I felt like, all right, title fight here against a Bilal Muhammad who is really coming to his own and is a smart fighter, especially game plan wise. Let's see what he comes up with against Shavkat. Now, Ian Gary presents a different kind of challenge than Bilal Muhammad would. I would say this: the thing Ian Gary has been the best at in his UFC career so far, other than getting people to feel some way about him, positively or negatively, but the thing that he has done well has been deciding what kind of fight it's going to be and where and at what range and at what pace it's going to take place. He's been surprisingly good at that and like has surprised me at how much success he's found doing that. That's though the exact thing that no one has been able to do against Shavkat. He every time you fight Shavkat, everybody has ended up in a Shavkat fight, whether they wanted to or not. It's like Marab, like Khabib, really, where he's just going to go out there and do the same shit to you that he has done to everybody else, and nobody has been able to even slow it down, much less stop it. Is Ian Gary, who excels at getting you into his kind of a zone, the guy who can figure that out? I have some doubts. I don't know about you.
Oh yeah, some serious doubts. Not only us, but odds makers do not think that this one will be all that competitive. Shavkat Rachmanov going off at minus 375, Ian Gary at plus 295 at the moment. So if you got $20 you never want to see again, you could put it on almost a 3-1 underdog in Ian Gary, but I do not recommend it.
Yeah.
I don't think he's winning that one. I think we come out of this one saying to ourselves, that boy good.
Yeah.
Shavkat Rachmanov, that boy good. And I agree with you. I thought it would have been fun to see him fight Bilal Muhammad for the title, but I'm also not arguing with this one because there is just something enticing about the idea of seeing two undefeated prospects go out there and fight each other in a situation where somebody's going to suffer their first loss and the other person is going to emerge as a bona fide, this guy is the new hotness number one contender for the title. So yeah, it was going to be cool to see Shavkat fight for the title now, but if things play out according to chalk, I feel like he becomes an even more interesting contender for Bilal Muhammad or whoever happens to be the champion if he wins this fight.
Yeah, and I also think that this is not necessarily a bad idea for Ian Gary to take this fight, to step in as the replacement against Shavkat, because he was already in fight camp, right? So it's not like he took it without like coming off the couch or anything. But he was going to fight Joaquin Buckley, right? Which, if he had gone out there and beat Joaquin Buckley, good. You know, you keep moving on up the ranks. That's a quality win, and it'll move you a little bit forward. It forces a few more people to have to take you seriously, all that kind of stuff. If you go out there and you lose to Joaquin Buckley, and that's your first loss in as a professional, then that looks kind of bad, and people go, all right, the the hype is over for Ian Gary. You know, back to the middle of the pack with you. But if you go out there, you take a fight on, you know, as a late replacement against Shavkat, that boy good Rachmanov, and you don't win, fine. You know what? We didn't expect you to. That boy good. We expected him to go out there and beat you. If you somehow come out there and beat him, you're an immediate title contender overnight. So the rewards outweigh the risks easily, I think, for Ian Gary here. I think he does probably lose this one, but there ain't no shame in losing to Shavkat.
You know what's interesting is they both have incredibly comparable recent histories in the sport. Ian Machado, Gary's most recent 4 wins are Daniel Rodriguez, Neil Magny, Jeff Neal, and Michael Page. Shavkat Rachmanov's most recent wins are Carlston Harris, Neil Magny, Jeff Neal, and Stephen Thompson. So, like, that's kind of a weird mirror image, right? We both fight Neil Magny, we both fight Jeff Neal, and then we both fight beloved but aging striker, karate guy, Stephen Thompson, and MVP.
One difference, though, between those is Ian Gary's winning these fights by decision. Neil Magny and Michael Page, unanimous decisions. The Jeff Neal one, a split decision. Shavkat is running through people.
Yeah, he's got
Doesn't ever,
3 performance of the night bonuses in 4 of those fights.
and none of them have seemed close at all.
Both these guys need to get someone to edit their Wikipedia page because Ian Gary doesn't even have a picture. And Shavkat Rakhmonov, it's looking like someone maybe cropped like a selfie that he took. And it's, you could increase the brightness, I think, if you wanted to use a filter of some kind. And it's just
backlit. That's a mistake.
It's not capturing the full panache of That Boy Good, which I feel like is too bad.
Also, somebody needs to work on the personal life sections of both of these guys, because this is always a minefield for MMA fighter Wikipedia pages. But Ian Gary just says, Gary married Layla Anali in Las Vegas on 26th of February 2022. In April 2022, it was announced she was pregnant with the couple's first child. He announced he had a son in October 2022. Okay, great. Shavkat's, you think that one's bad and just pretty dry and boring? Shavkat's personal life section says, Rakhmonov's younger sister, Sora Rakhmonova, is also a mixed martial artist. Rakhmonov is a Muslim. You can't even tell me what football team they support, what kind, what style of music they like. These are the categories generally that we explore in the personal life section of an MMA fighter who does not have a long history of arrests. Isn't that, it'll usually be like he enjoys hip hop and R&B and is a supporter of Liverpool or something. Normally that's what you get. Here you don't even get that.
Yeah. Ian Gary better be paying a full-time assistant to be refreshing that personal life page.
You're saying people might get creative
on his Wikipedia page. He needs to keep an eye on that because you could see some rogue editing happening on that one. What else on UFC 310 sparks your interest? Like we said at the top of the show, you got a ton of fighters that you know on here. You got Chris Weidman and Aljamain Sterling, former champions, both of them on the preliminary card, which is interesting. You got Clay Guida on here. Clay Guida versus Chase Hooper.
Yeah.
Ben Folks, how are they going to play us like that? Can we just declare it a tie?
Oh, that's fun, man. That's just a fun pairing. Of course, Nate the Train.
Nate the Train. If he doesn't lose, he's probably going to win.
Bryce Mitchell and Crone Gracie maybe going to get into a jiu-jitsu off.
What are we doing there? What's happening? What's going on with the matchmaking in Bryce Mitchell versus Crone Gracie?
Well, Bryce Mitchell is a crazy person.
Okay, yes, that was part of the equation that was considered.
I don't know if you remember when he got his head knocked clean off by Josh Emmett in his last fight, almost exactly a year ago. This time last year, December 16th, 2023. Do you remember that one? That was one of the worst knockouts that I've seen in recent memory.
Yeah, that was bad.
Josh Emmett just flatlined that man. And so I think the UFC went and they looked and they were like, okay, this guy had kind of an amazing run up through the ranks with 15-0, blazed through a bunch of people who, were real UFC people we thought maybe would beat him. And then he's gone 1-2 in his last 3, but the losses, first the Ilia Topuria one, that one aged pretty well. Ilia Topuria is good as hell. Then he won a decision over Dan Ige, and then just got absolutely murdered by Josh Emmett. And now I think we're going like, all right, what can we find for noted crazy person Bryce Mitchell to do that is still noteworthy against a name that kind of means something, but also is not just completely throwing the guy into the meat grinder? And so somebody looked at the UFC roster, went, oh shit, Crone Gracie is still here. Crone Gracie's still under contract. How about that? All right. Just call him up, see what he thinks. Got a jiu-jitsu guy for him, and they went ahead and put it together and then put it on the main card of this pay-per-view.
I feel you got to turn over some rocks before you find Crone Gracie on the UFC roster. Here he is. Was he 5-0?
Montana, in fact, Chad.
He's got 6 fights. He's got 7 fights He's 5-2. He's lost back-to-back fights to Cub Swanson and Charles Jourdain, and the last time he fought was May of 2023. So just a cool 18 months off for the 36-year-old Kron Gracie.
Working on getting that school in Bozeman where it needs to be. I assume he's been in Bozeman this entire time.
It could well be. Lots of interesting stuff, honestly, on UFC 310. If you're not going to partake just because of the main event, which I contend will be exciting and interesting, but we understand if it doesn't exactly, light you on fire with the desire to watch Pantoja versus Asakura, there is still a lot of other interesting stuff on here that we encourage you to check out, especially since much of it is on the free portion of the card over there on ESPN Plus.
Well, yeah, and speaking of the free portion of the card, Aljamain Sterling seemed not thrilled with being on the free portion of the card. What do you make of that whenever fighters bring this up? Because Aljamain Sterling has been like, I'm going to show them they fucked up by putting me on the ESPN prelims of this card. I'm a main card fighter. Kind of how dare they? And then somebody asked Movsar Evloev about it, and he was like, I do not care. I get paid the same. It does not matter to me. Basically, my night of work will get done sooner. And,
make a late movie, maybe, after this one's over.
Both reasonable takes that I can understand from the fighter's perspective. I can see how Aljamain Sterling looks at it, given his history with the UFC and how he thinks the UFC feels about him, not entirely without basis. And he's going, they're fucking with me.
Yeah.
Like they are giving the old champion a fuck you by putting me on the prelims and being like, how you like that? Maybe hoping this guy will get over on me, and I'll show him. I'll go in there and I'll show him. I could also see being like, hey, I don't get paid anymore to fight on the main card. And frankly, if I fight on the ESPN portion, probably more people see it than buy the pay-per-view and see me in the second fight of the pay-per-view portion. So that doesn't make no difference to me.
Yeah, I feel like you can see where he's coming from, right? You look around at some of these other guys that are either former champions or known guys that are down here on the prelims. They're all getting a little long in the tooth. They're all arguably a little bit past their prime. And Chris Weidman, Michael Chiesa, Clay Guida, guys like that. And then you got Aljamain Sterling down there who, not too long ago, he was, in fact, the men's bantamweight champion. It was only last August that he lost that to Sean O'Malley. Aljamain Sterling lost to Sean O'Malley more recently than Kron Gracie had a fight in the UFC. And then Sean O'Malley is the only guy that Aljamain Sterling has lost to since 2017 when he lost to Marlon Moraes. He has since won all of them, including defending the men's bantamweight championship 3 times before losing to Sean O'Malley. And oh, by the way, after that, followed it up with a unanimous decision win over Calvin Kattar at UFC 300. So if I was Aljamain Sterling, I might look askance at the booking. I might look at Bryce Mitchell and Kron Gracie being on the main card and just say like, hey, hard for me not to see that as a slap in the face. But
right, but also one thing you gotta, because that is the one fight that I was thinking if you were gonna trade it out, you're not gonna swap it out with Nate the Train.
No, you got to start the pay-per-view with a banger. You got to, if the train is on the card, if the train is pulling into the station, he's pulling in as the curtain jerker on the pay-per-view.
Yeah, so that makes sense for that one to be on there. The Kron Gracie Bryce Mitchell one is the one you would swap out. I guess maybe you're thinking, well, part of what you're thinking maybe is if Bryce Mitchell is going to win a fight and then get on a microphone and declare that gravity is not real and you should go to the roof of whatever building you were watching this in and jump off, which he may do, you probably want him to do it on pay-per-view and not on ESPN2. I don't know if that's the one you want him doing on the TV at Buffalo Wild Wings. You want that to the paying crowd that ideally knows a little bit more about what to make of this shit. So, also, maybe you look at Aljamain Sterling and his style against Movsar Evloev's style, a guy who has only won decisions since he's been in the UFC, has not finished a single fight since he has come to the UFC. And maybe you look at that one and you go, this probably is not going to be the fight of the night. Let's put it on the prelims. Maybe something good happens. We get a highlight out of it. Probably it doesn't. Probably what you get is a 3-round decision. But it's early in the night, and we're still building up excitement headed into the pay-per-view.
He's going off as more than a 2-1 underdog, is Aljamain Sterling. So it's interesting booking all the way around for your guy, the former champion. All right, that's going to do it this week for the Co-Main Event podcast. Again, we will be over on the Patreon page all week, patreon.com/co-main event. Hit us up over there. Take advantage of the 50% off sale right now. Use that code 20E as an echo 37 to get in for half price for either your next month or your next year. As for right now, thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate the support. We are done. We are through. We are out.
Maybe one thing we should try to include in this week's $20 and I want to see again is bets on what crazy conspiracy Bryce Mitchell will espouse if he's to win.
I am interested in any and all Bryce Mitchell prop bets, including but not limited to what injury will Bryce Mitchell sustain around the farm before he shows up on fight night.
I'm saying Bryce Mitchell goes old school and comes up with something about the Bermuda Triangle. Kind of classic, conspiracy theory classic.
You know what he could do is pander to the Ben Folks audience and do some JFK shit.
All right, listen, you know what? That shit, everybody understands both the obviousness and the importance of that event, except for you.
What if Bryce Mitchell got on the mic and he was like, Oswald was the lone gunman?
See, that's just the exception. That proves the fucking rule.
Any half-decent hunter could make that shot, Bryce Mitchell would say.
God damn it. I hate how plausible that is.